Our media product uses a variety of common codes and conventions that can be seen within short horror films and feature horror films. One of the most obvious conventions we followed that can be seen through many short films is that it was a low-budget film. This is also a common convention of some feature films such as Paranormal Activity and the Blair Witch Project. This did bring us some restrictions when creating our film, as we had to adjust to what we had available to us, particularly locations. Another common convention of short films is that have limited locations. This did cause some difficulty when location scouting, as we resorted to using one of our homes to create the film, where originally we were going to use a recently bought house that one of our peers owned. However, this was unavailable to us, meaning that we were restricted with location. This did cause some difficulty, however, we were able to overcome it with some minor adjustments to script and story, allowing us to still create a film similar to our original intention, and to follow the same purpose of uses and gratifications theory, to entertain its audience.
One of the main key conventions of short films that we found was limited dialogue, and a very small cast, on average around 3 to 4 actors, with one primary antagonist and one main protagonist. Within our film we had one antagonist, the killer, and one protagonist, Veronica, and a sub-protagonist, the victim, we're seen within the camera glitches. We did not have any professional actors available to us, which helped us fall into the common codes and conventions of short films, as we ensured we had a very limited cast, with very few lines. So without even realising, we had already achieved many codes and conventions that follow short films. This could also be said to follow the uses and gratifications theory, as it may appeal to the audience's social integrative needs, as they see people of a similar age group to them acting within a horror film.
When it came to filming was when many of the common conventions of horror films set into our film, particularly with camera shots and lighting. Low-key lighting is a stereotypical convention associated with horror films, as it allows scenes to be darker. Darkness again is another stereotype associated with horror films, and around 2 minutes of our footage is shot outside at night. We also use chiaroscuro lighting within the camera glitches to generate an uncomfortable feeling for the audience, as they try to piece together the pieces of the scene that they can see to understand what is happening. We also used high-angle and low-angle shots to establish dominance throughout the film. In some situations, the audience positioned at a low-angle shot looking up at Veronica, in conjunction with seeing half the film from the killer's position. This makes us feel like we are more powerful than the protagonist. However, we are sometimes put in the position of a low-angle shot, making it appear that Veronica is the more dominant figure. This then establishes confusion for the audience, as they are unsure as what to expect to happen, until the end of the film, where the story behind the film becomes clear, thus creating disequilibrium. This challenges Todorow's narrative theory, as our film does not finish with the restoration of equilibrium.
Shaky cam is another convention we saw within the found footage films such as the Blair Witch Project. This helped us to create a sense of disorientation, and this in turn assisted in the development of our non-linear narrative.
When looking into conventions of short films and horror films, there were a few conventions that we developed, not so much challenging the conventions of the genre, but expanding upon them. Parallel editing would be a primary convention that we developed. This method of editing was unseen in any of the short films that we researched during our research into the short horror film genre. However, this method of editing was key for us to develop our narrative and ensure our film made sense. We felt that this method of editing was unused in other short films, as it was quite challenging to incorporate 2 different sides to the story within such a short space of time. However, this was what made our story stand out to other short films.
In comparison to the feature film horror genre, the only obvious convention that you could say we had developed upon was that our story followed a thought-provoking narrative as opposed to the common linear horror narrative. Whilst many horrors follow a linear story, ours causes the audience to piece together the film themselves to understand the narrative rather than spoon-feeding it to them. This was a challenging concept to manage, however, because we were making a short film that helped us to make this action justifiable, as many of the narratives used within short films did not always make sense, and often left the audience asking questions at the end, which is exactly what we hoped our narrative would achieve.
This adjustment to the narrative could be said to challenge Vladimir Prop's narrative theory, as he states that the narrative often follows a specific structure: preparation, complication, transference, struggle, return, and recognition. Our narrative follows a completely different structure. In fact, the only factor that could be said to be the same would be complication, perhaps due to the end of the film when Veronica reads the scrapbook. Similarly, with Todorow's narrative theory, our film only really generates disequilibrium. This, then, is no restoration of equilibrium, as there is no happy ending to the film we have created. In relation to the reception theory, our film carries a loosely dominant reading that the killer is going back to his old home to kill his new inhabitant. However, our film generates a much greater negotiated reading, as the audience are required to piece together the story themselves. The final scenes of Veronica reading the scrapbook allow the audience to produce their own negotiated reading as they please, whilst there is still clearly an underlying dominant reading for our media text. The audience will still generate their own negotiated readings.
More often than not, a common convention of horror films is that we are in the position of the victim, feeling weak in comparison to the killer. However, within our film we decided to challenge this stereotypical convention and create something different. Half of the film positions us in the point of view of the killer, as all of these shots are from a handheld camera. This causes the audience to feel as if they are in the position of power against the victim, thus generating a feeling of uneasiness and discomfort. This relates to the effects model of audience theory, as the consumption of our media text has a negative influence upon our audience, as they are passive and powerless to prevent the influence of the text upon them.
However, it is only at the end where the killer puts down the handheld camera and almost detaches himself from the audience that we can really feel pity for the victim as we witness her murder. This also challenges the conventions of the instant gratification theory, as the power does not lie within the audience's hands. They are subjected to the murder of a girl they are unable to prevent. The only real appeal this text provides for the audience in relation to instant gratification theory is to entertain its audience.